So here's the old map of Palermo. We gotta get oriented a little bit here. Back in the 1850s, there was a thriving city called Palermo on the Missouri River in the northeast corner of the Kansas Territory. However, today, almost nothing remains of this town, and hardly any info about this place online exists. I talked to my grandma, who had an old map of Palermo in her attic. I set out my bus to explore Palermo in person, located a graveyard that had not been found in years, and learned the eerie reason why Palermo went downhill in the 1860s. So I made it to St. Joseph, Missouri, where the Pony Express actually started. Got my bus as our vehicle to explore today, and we're gonna head over to Palermo, see what all we can find over there. To get over to Palermo, I had to travel through St. Joseph, Missouri, and a small town in Doniphan County, Kansas called Wathena. When you look at really old maps, like this one from 1870, you can see Palermo listed as one of the towns there. However, when you go to modern day maps, like Google Maps, you see nothing of the sort at the exact same spot. A lot of newspaper articles from the time describe Palermo as a pretty bustling city with a steamboat landing, with a bunch of different stores and people of all sorts of professions, like lawyers, doctors, and more. However, even by the 1910s, Palermo was already described as a ghost town. Even the Wikipedia article for Palermo has very little information on it. Honestly, a lot less information than even some extremely remote Arctic islands. So, the first thing I did was head to the site of where the cemetery was to see if I could even find it first of all, and see if there was any key names there that were around when the city was founded. Then, I went to the actual site of the city, tried to see what buildings remained of Palermo, and figured out what actually caused Palermo to go downhill. So I typed in the coordinates of where the cemetery was supposed to be and looked around a bit. I'm looking down here for the gravestones, but not seeing any. There's some that look like some, but I think they're just concrete slabs, so I'm gonna go a little further. I'm deep into here now, still not seeing it, so I wonder if it's somewhere else. After not finding anything there, I realized that I had been looking in the wrong spot. So, drove over to the correct location, and it did match what the photos were showing that the gravesite was located at. Got my Volkswagen stuck going up to the actual site of the cemetery, so let's go see it. Okay, I made it to the top of the hill. This is the Palermo graveyard over here. So, this is so cool. Pretty close to where the actual town of Palermo is. Check out if there's any historical figures or how old these graves are. This one right here is from 1905. This person was born in 1821, and there's one over here that's much older than that, it appears. I can't exactly tell what it says or what the date is. And there's another one over here. I'll check that out too. This person lived from 1861 to 1926, so this person was pretty much born at a couple of years before Palermo was destroyed. So this person would have been just a baby right before that entire thing happened. Born in 1834, died in 1904. So this person was definitely alive during Palermo's existence. Most of the graves here have dates in the early 1900s, not any in the 1860s or 1850s. So I don't know if they're like buried underground or if they didn't make a significant marking back then, but I'm not seeing those either. I can't find the old grave of John Steyerwalt anywhere around here. There's no photos online either, but I wish I could find it because he was one of the founders of Palermo way back in the day. But it says he was buried here somewhere. In the first backyard, we also found this thing that said Miss Winslow's soothing syrup, which is interesting, and this cool brick. And then she showed us her really cool old heater and oven in one, and it has a bunch of other functions as well. It's super cool. Next, I headed down to where the site of Palermo was, and took out my map to see what all we could find there. So here's the old map of Palermo. This is where we are right now. Pretty close to First and Main. First and Main is just up here. So we're gonna check out the old schoolhouse, which is on this road. A lot of these roads are not currently active. They're just brush and woods. So we're gonna check out the main road, see what kind of buildings we can find. Okay, so first we're gonna go up to where this mill was, around this area, and then we're gonna head down to where the old schoolhouse was, around here, and see what other kind of buildings we can find. We're around right here right now, which is near where the steamboat landing is. This is pretty much where the steamboat landing was. This is what kept Palermo alive for a long time, until it stopped coming by here, and then eventually the town slowly dwindled away. But this is the Missouri River right here. Decently low right now. You head up upstream on the river from here, you'll get to St. Joseph, Missouri. If you go all the way down, you'll end up hitting Kansas City eventually, and then continuing down all the way to Louisiana at the very end of it. Here are some of the small little tributaries that feed into the Missouri River. There's these kind of little creeks all over around here, all the way down to New Orleans. And here's where that Walnut Creek meets the Missouri River. It just goes all the way up there, and that's what a lot of town of Palermo was built on back in the day. Interestingly, in the middle of basically nowhere, there's a spring all by itself that a lot of people actually to this day get their drinking water from. Currently it's not dripping, but usually this is dripping and people just put their cup under there, and this is full of water too. Not exactly sure where it comes from, but it comes up from the hills there, and people will drive by this area all the time to get their drinking water. Now, to figure out what happened in Palermo, we gotta go back a little bit. Before the 1830s, lots of indigenous people lived in present-day Doniphan County, like the Kanza that Kansas was named after. However, the Indian Removal Act of 1830, a truly horrifying and awful act by the US government, forcibly moved Native American people from the southeast part of the US to modern-day Oklahoma and Kansas. One of these tribes that was forcibly relocated was the Kickapoo, which was promised land in this part of modern-day Doniphan County, Kansas during the 1832 treaty with the Kickapoo. However, during that time, white missionaries such as Reverend Samuel Irvin seek to, quote, preach the gospel and teach the way to civilization, end quote, for the indigenous people in the area. And more European Americans moved into this area to set up their own cities. In 1854, through the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the government went back on their promises to the indigenous people and took land away from them and formed the territory of Kansas. The Kickapoo and other tribes in the area lost the majority of their land, and lots of white settlers moved in, bringing deadly diseases with them. The government promised to use the funds that were raised from the Kickapoo's land for the Kickapoo tribe's benefit, but many of these funds did not end up going to the tribes. Famously, Kansas Territory Governor Andrew Reeder used insider knowledge to illegally buy lands from them that were going to become a railroad for his own profit. He was eventually forced out of office by President Franklin Pierce because of that scandal, as well as his handling of Free State matters. 2 years later, in 1856, Palermo was founded in this newly acquired land on the Missouri River. According to an 1857 article from the Kansas Weekly Herald, Palermo quickly became a booming town. Palermo claimed the best hotel in the territory. They had a sawmill and a grist mill. They had blacksmith shops, wagon factories that were doing really well. A printing press was also being developed there, and a fully functional ferry to the steamboat landing next to Palermo was operational. According to a 1914 article, peak 1850s Palermo was once one of the most important towns in the county, had 6 to 7 stores, 2 flouring mills, with one being 3 stories high, 3 to 4 saloons, and warehouses on the waterfront. During this time, the late 1850s, the previously mentioned Kansas-Nebraska Act set the stage for the concept known as popular sovereignty. In short, this allowed the people of the Kansas Territory to determine if they wanted to allow the horrific practice of slavery in their own territory. This caused a lot of fighting within the Kansas Territory, even with people coming over from Missouri and interfering in elections, lots of violence, and burning down towns. This reached an escalation during the Civil War in 1863 when a Confederate group raided Lawrence, Kansas, where a lot of abolitionists lived, and killed over 150 people. Some of this fighting did make its way up to Palermo, where in 1863, that same year, Missourians burned part of Palermo down, but were convinced to stop halfway through by John Stuart. Even by the start of the Civil War, Palermo was already starting to decline almost as rapidly as it ascended. There were some financiers who had been outlawed for crooked work, which caused suspicion among the residents. The Bob Trail Railroad planned to come through the area, reviving some spirits that Palermo would take off again. There was even a plan for a large university called Wayland University to be built there, but it never ended up working out for the town. Even in the 1910s, Palermo was already described as a place that only the real old-timers could point out. In conclusion, Palermo's rise was as quick as its fall, and the Civil War, railroad routes, and business controversies turned a once booming town to a ghost town in a number of years. For more videos from me, check out this video in the bottom left corner. Also, this video took a long time and a lot of research to do, so if you don't mind just hitting the like button, that'd be very appreciated. Thank you.